Even though the story in Torna the Golden Country takes place before Xenoblade Chronicles 2 canonically, Torna was still made after Xenoblade 2, and you can't have Monolith Soft making something new without it being an improvement. It feels like every Xenoblade game Monolith Soft has made has built upon what has come before it. This is the main reason I think the gameplay in Torna is better than Xenoblade 2. Because it takes the formula of that game and not only makes it better, but builds upon what already worked in Xenoblade 2. In my opinion, we see the most improvement in the battle system from Xenoblade 2 to Torna. In Xenoblade 2, you could only switch between blades who weren't actually controlled as your main fighter. They simply acted as support characters that gave you different sets of arts to perform when you switched between them. Your main fighter remained as the same driver that you equipped before battle, and you can only switch between these drivers after a battle was over. In Torna though, you can perform what is called a Vanguard switch in order to switch between your driver and blade, which allows you to actually control your blade for the first time. If you switch quick enough between your driver and blade while you are in battle after you are dealt an attack from your enemy, you can also recover some of your health. In addition to this, you can also still switch between the blades that you can now control, and your driver now has their own set of arts similar to blades. The reason we are able to switch between driver and blade during combat without it becoming too overwhelming is because our characters now consist of teams. Each team consists of a driver and 2 blades at max, allowing you to switch pretty seamlessly between them given you've waited enough time between switching. This alone adds more depth to the combat, but there's more. You can also stack orbs, the most satisfying combat mechanic in the game, a lot quicker in Torna, allowing you to pull off massive combos more frequently. The reason the devs went in this direction is most likely due to the fact that Torna is a shorter game, which means there needed to be a quicker progression in the combat system. However, I really think Xenoblade 2 would have still worked great with this combat mechanic implemented, so perhaps it's simply just an evolution. To explain stacking orbs quickly, in Xenoblade 2 you had to pull off 3 different special blade attacks that form a blade combo within a certain time frame just to stack 1 orb. These attacks could only be pulled off in the order of least powerful to most powerful, otherwise it wouldn't count. In Torna, you can still pull off these blade combos and they are helpful and grant more damage, but they aren't necessary to stack an orb anymore. Rather, each time you pull off a special attack, it grants you 1 orb, which means in theory, even if you always pulled off all those blade combos perfectly in Xenoblade 2, you would still stack orbs 3 times faster in Torna. In both games, these orbs are used in chain attacks to prolong the amount of time your chain attack lasts, allowing you to deal massive damage to your enemy. So being able to stack orbs in a fraction of the time allows for a better chance for a longer, more powerful chain attack in Torna. In addition to the overhauled orb stacking mechanic, some of the boss fights also incorporate some unique mechanics that I'll let you figure out for yourself. Aside from some other small combat changes that aren't too noteworthy, Torna also introduces camping spots, which provide a place to rest and level up your characters and enter into character-driven dialogue. While this dialogue isn't mandatory to the story, it definitely helps to give the story more depth. In addition to this, these campsites also serve as a streamlined and condensed crafting and cooking hub. You can cook and craft items to strengthen your characters in many different ways and to help you complete specific side quests. At first I thought I wouldn't really care for these campsites when I was first introduced to them, but they're actually a lot more helpful than I thought they would be. Being able to craft items at the campsite also makes certain side quests pretty in-depth. Speaking of which, I would be remiss not to talk about possibly the only downside to this game: the spawn of Satan himself. Mandatory side quests. Let me just ask, why on earth are these things called side quests if they're required to further the main story of the game? The developers cleverly mask the fact that these side quests are mandatory by telling the player that they need to raise the community level, which is done by completing side quests, in order to please the townsfolk before moving on. Hiding seemingly monotonous game tasks behind walls like this usually helps, but not in this case. I understand the premise behind this, and I think it's great that they're incorporating these quests into the main story, but why so many? If I remember right, I think you have to do like 48 quests total over the course of the game in order to complete it. Correct me in the comments down below if I'm wrong. I get that it helps make the game longer, but it really doesn't need it to be a good game. Plus, I would have been fine if they made the game a little shorter and not included them. I would have rather them be implemented in some other way and not be treated as side quests. I also wish you were told in some way that you had to do this many side quests early on in the game in case you weren't doing any throughout the game up to that point, like this idiot, and then suddenly have to play catch up at points in the game where you have to complete so many side quests to move on. Even though I really wished I wasn't forced to do these quests in the way that I was, there's really nothing wrong with these quests, and I'm glad I completed all that I did. It makes me feel accomplished. I also like the fact that I was raising my community level, which gives you bonuses as it's raised. With that said, I really think these mandatory side quests were the only thing that frustrated me about this game, and as much as I complain about them, they really weren't all that bad. They definitely weren't bad enough to ruin the game for me, as all the improvements made to this game far outweigh this mere annoyance. which every game has, by the way. And you know what they say, you're more critical about the games you love. So even with this small hiccup, there are new elements to the combat system, and as a whole it's more refined. The added camping spot allows for checkpoints that aren't a hassle to get to, and the side quests are actually pretty fun minus the whole mandatory part. Honestly, the only thing that I feel Xenoblade 2 does better than Torna is tell a more captivating story, though Torna does give it a run for its money. I think this not only has to do with the fact that I prefer Xenoblade 2's story, but it also has to do with the fact that Torna is a shorter game by nature, which means it isn't able to tell as grand of a story.